Okay, we're going to try this again. Good morning. Yay, it looks like it's working this time. All right. I apologize for the technical difficulties earlier. My name is Samantha Mirabal, and I'm part of the applications team with Melco. And this is good morning. Yay, it's working. All right, second time. These are our design shop talks where we get together on a weekly basis going forward to answer your questions and see how we can help you be more successful within Design Shop, or whatever questions you may have in general. So I do have a list of questions that came in before, so we'll go through those. And good morning. And if there's others, go ahead and type them in, and I'll try to keep an eye on the screen so that we can go through them. So one of the questions we got was, how do we merge objects? I see the option, but it's always grayed out and unusable. Hey, Judy. All right, so let's see. I'll go over to Design Shop and let's see how we do that. So I'll start off by drawing a little shape. Okay, so I'm going to draw a triangle. Once I draw a triangle, I'll give it a start. Oops. Hit enter, give it a start, a stop, and a stitch direction. And now I've got a triangle on there. There was also another question that showed how to draw a circle. So I've got a fill and a circle. I'll do left click, and sound left us. I still have sound. Hopefully the sound still works. All right, well, I have a circle, so I'll just assume it works. Scott and everyone text me if it's not. All right, so once you have two shapes that are overlapping, what we can do at this point is we have to select them both to get them to merge. So how do we do that? Well, I can draw a box around it. I have two objects selected. That will do it. Or I can select over here, and that will do it. I can also select one, hold the shift key, select the other. All of that gets us to the same thing, where we've got two objects selected, and then up here I can say combine objects. All right, once they're combined, now we can do other things. Let's say we want to make that look more like a defined hat rather than just a weird shape. I can say insert curve splice. I can go click around, adding whatever shape I want, hit enter. I can add different stitch directions, let the computer try to do it, or I can go and say, well, let me add a curved stitch direction maybe, and I'll get rid of some of the straight ones. So you can see there's a bunch of different things that we can do. All right, so another way we can use that merge elements or subtract is, let me this time draw a circle, because there was a question on how do we draw a perfect circle. So if I'm going to do it as a fill, I'll also do it as a satin in a minute. So if I click on Insert Complex Fill, down here we've got our little circle icon. So when you click on that one, what you'll do is left click on the screen, left click again, and now when I shift and drag, well, when I drag, number one, it'll make an oval. If I hold the shift key down and left click, that will lock it. The shift locks it to a perfect circle. The click ends that element. All right, so if I have that, and let's say I want to take a letter out of it. All right, so I've got this shape. I want to center them. So again, I have to select both elements. I can center them. And now to subtract, it's similar to merge. You'd select the shape you want to subtract from, then what you're subtracting from it. And you can either click on the subtract element, right click, go to operations, subtract elements. All of it will do the same thing. And what you'll see now is I have a hole in my fill in the shape of that letter that I wrote on top of it. All right. Now, if you want to draw a satin circle, which is a constant width column, you would do that by saying single line center, and again, click on that circular input. So left click, left click. If I just drag, it'll make any shape oval. If I hold the shift key down and left click, now I have a perfect satin stitch. I can change its width to be wider, you know, whatever I want it to be. And now I've got a perfect circle. All right. Another way, if you have a shape that you want to add a border to, you can always go change element from one type to another, single line center add, and it will add a border on the shape. So there's a bunch of ways to do the exact same thing, of whether you're creating shapes, adding borders, making perfect circles. And so just to do the merge one more time, let's say I take my hat, put it on top of my circle, and I want to merge those two. Well, I have to select them both, so I'm going to hold the control key, and I'm going to merge selected. And now I've merged those together. Okay. All right, so there's our question on how do we merge objects. It's going to be grayed out and unusable if you don't have multiple objects selected. All right. Another question we had was, I know there's a way to move a whole row of points instead of just one point at a time. How do we do that? All right, so back to DesignShop. Let's do it. All right, so I've got way too many points on this S, so let's use those since we've got a bunch. So let's say I want to move, these handful of points over. Well, of course, I can left click and move, which is what we're asking, how do we avoid doing that? All right, so instead of selecting one at a time, I can hold the control key and select multiple. And again, that's still, I have to click on them individually. But when you do that, now they're all black, so now they can move as a unit. All right, well, if you don't want to individually select points, you just want to grab them. Right here, you have this custom point selection. So you select the shape you want to edit. You then click on the custom point selection right here. And then you draw a circle around what points you want to grab. Hit enter. And now you'll see all of those are black. So now I can left click and drag and move that entire line wherever I want it to go. Okay. If you want to select, you don't want points in a row, that's okay too. You can, again, select custom point selection. Say maybe you want those two, then that one, and then maybe all of those. Now they're all black, and now all of those move as a unit. Okay, so that is how we move a whole row of points instead of just one point at a time. So we did how to make a perfect satin circle. All right. Again, I'll do it one more time just so we don't lose that. I'll do a new, so circle, well, single line center, circle, left click, hold the shift key and left click. If you know what size you want it to be, you can then select it and say, all right, I want that to be 0.5 inches. And I type that in down here. And maybe you want that to be a 30-point satin stitch. So, okay. So that would be a half-inch circle roughly at a 30-point width on the satin stitches. What else did we have? All right. I want to know how to shut off the auto feature on the satin stitch. All right. And how wide I can do a satin stitch. All right, so the widest satin stitch is 127 points, I guess, before it'll convert over into jump stitches. So the, where did my thing go? There it is. All right, so how you would toggle that satin stitch off, so the fill stitch from being a fill and over into a satin would be here. So let me draw, actually I'll just go into the properties of this one. So right here, you'll see there's use fills for stitch lines greater than, and then there's a number. What this will do is that as an element's getting bigger or smaller, if any stitch gets over whatever number is in here, it will convert it over into a fill stitch. So right now, mine's set up to 70 points. So if any stitch from one point to the next is longer than 70 points, the software will go ahead and convert it, even though it's said to be a satin, it will go make it into a fill. Well, if you want it to be satin, regardless of how big it is, you would set this to 0. That way, no matter how large it is, it'll always be a satin stitch. Okay, so that'll turn off the kind of those random fills that you'll see in there. Now, use that with caution. I mean, that's there for a reason. If you think about really long satin stitches, imagine if you had a left chest logo and you had half-inch pieces of thread going back and forth for a column. that's a lot more likely to be snagged by pens going in and out of a pocket or in the laundry than if you had a nice 1/4 inch stitch, right? So it's just be careful and check your application, make sure it makes sense if you're going to do very long satin stitches. Okay. All right, what else? We had, all right, can you go over adding a gradient? Yeah, I'll do that in a moment. All right, let's do that. So I kind of set up a little example to do, sorry, I'm making you seasick right here, but to show how to do this sort of thing. We had a question on how do we do something like this Dakota collectible design where you've got some sort of scene within some lettering and gradients. So since that, I went ahead and just put it into one little example that we could talk through. So let's look at that. Let me get my things organized, sorry. Okay, so let me close some of this mess I've been making. All right, so to get a scene in there, the first thing, really, you're going to have to digitize it. So just like the Dakota collectible design, they had some sort of basis art that showed them what the design was going to be within here. I made this one real quick in Illustrator, just typed out some words, made the background stick within this one right here where it's draw inside the words, and that's what created it for me. Okay, so from there I copied and pasted it over in DesignShop, and now I have some base art to work with. So when we're working with this, first thing is how do we make a gradient? That was the first question. So if we look at this design, I've got kind of a gradient going here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a vector, take my vector and just add a stitch direction to it. Okay, and I'm going to make that one blue so you can see it. I'll turn this other one off for now. All right, so right now all that did was when you do a column element and hold shift and enter, makes a weird shape column. Why does it do that? Shift enter closes the shape, so it's probably closing back to the original spot. I'll try it later and see. Okay, so on my fill, I now have a fill here. If I want to turn it into a gradient, what you do is you go into the properties, and under the effects, you have this custom density. So when you turn on custom density, you can tell it to be a blend. And when you turn on the blend, I can then give it multiple colors. So this one's going the wrong way. My blend has blues at the top, greens toward the bottom. So I'm going to flip it, make it reversed. And I also see some travel stitches in here that I don't want. So I'm going to come over here and take this to a trapunto edge. Okay, and that will get rid of those random running travel stitches that it does. I can also fix some of that by moving my starts and stops around. So that creates a gradient for us. All right, so I've got a gradient fill here. So that's the first thing. Now when you're trying to additionally create your scene on there, well, let's go ahead and put a border on it. So just like we did before, I'm going to say change element from one type to another. I'm going to say single line center, add. And that adds a border. I like them a little bit larger, so I'm going to make this one 40 points. And let's make it black. There. All right, so now I've got a sky with a border on it, essentially. So now we have to add our trees in there. So what do we do with that? Well, I'm going to turn this off so we can see our artwork. We've got different ways we do it, but it really comes down to just digitizing it. Right, so I can zoom in on my artwork and select a complex fill and do it as a fill. It's not the most creative way to do it, probably not the most interesting, but you would just trace around, okay, your shape. So I'm only going to do to here just to give you the example for the moment, and I'll show you another way to do it. All right, so if I make a fill, obviously I don't want this many fills over it, so I'm going to have to do some cleanup later, but I'll give it a start, a stop, and a stitch direction. Put that up here and make it black. Helps if I select it, huh? There we go. Make it black. Put it over there. Turn back on my fill, and all right. So we've started digitizing the trees. That's flat, not exactly interesting. Well, rather than doing it that way, did we lose all the sound? Who knows? All right, rather than doing it this way, what you could do is spend a little bit more time digitizing out your trees. Because if you do that, then what you can end up with is something a lot more interesting. So this is literally, I did this, I used some of Scott's trees that he has down here, right here, and moved them around and edited and deleted some things. So to do those, you just drag them on, and then you can place them where you want, modify them, or use that as an example just to see how trees are done, right? So you can see how the different elements are put together and how it builds up to give it that randomness that looks interesting. So when you're creating those scenic things, it really comes down to getting your art and then just working through the digitizing, right? So deciding how you want to do it and working through it. So here I've got the sky, I've got some trees going. Like I said, you could do it that way, or we could do it kind of the boring way, which is just flat fills. So it really is just, how do you want it to look? How do you want to digitize it? Okay. What else do we have? Okay, so that's how to do a gradient. So we had some questions on, let's see, so I took everything off, I moved the stitch where I was going to go, and it kept going back to where it left off, and that was off. So yes, there are some short, basically how I'm reading this is, if I move my hoop, so I relocate it somewhere, how do I make it start whatever current stitch it is at that location rather than moving somewhere else, going back to wherever it thinks it should be? To do that on the keypad, you just hit the up and down arrows, okay, together, and that will say, all right, wherever the needle currently is, that is the new position. Now, Judy, in the same sense, you asked, well, if I want to move the hoop around and then tell it to go back to the same location, how do you do that? Well, you just use your hoop and your arrow buttons, move it around, and then to make it go back to the last stitch location, you would hit the left and right arrows together, and that would make them go back to the starting point. Okay. There are a whole bunch of hotkeys for this in the manual, so if you go to the manual, I just copied and pasted them here so you can see them. So the ones, let's see, where are they? Oh, there's the one. Return to last stitch is this one. Retain the X and Y position. That's wherever you moved it. Now that's the new X and Y. That's your up and down together. So these are all in your manual. I think it was, I don't remember what page, but they're there that you can go look them up later or reference this. All right. There was a question, when stitching out the same design over and over, do we need to reset it each time? No, just keep on going. Reset just sends it back to 0, and it returns the origin of the design to wherever the needle currently is. So for instance, if I am sewing my one-day design and for whatever reason I stop it right here. All right, so I stop sewing and I then click my reset button. What's going to happen is it's going to return the design back to the origin, and basically so it's having it's going to put the center of the design where that needle currently is. So if I stop there and I hit reset, my design's going to pop up over here. Okay, now if you want to avoid that, before hitting reset, you could say return to origin, and it will go back to this origin, so then when you reset, it'll reset the design in the same location. Now, reset I don't really use. Okay. I don't use a whole lot, really, if I just want to cancel something. You know, if I'm testing out designs and I've got through what I want and don't feel like finishing it, I can hit reset, you know, return to origin, reset, or just reset, and it just puts it back to 0. You don't have to click reset. All right. Let's see, I used a laser on my catbacks. Yeah, you don't have to return it back to center. That's okay, yeah. It's wherever you start the design is where it will start. So if you move it around, laser, whatever you want to do, when you hit start, that's what it will be. I never recenter things when I'm doing those sorts. I just move to the where I want it to start and hit go. All right. So we went over the reset design. We talked about this one, how to do this, and auto splits. All right. Hi, Cheryl. So let's do this real quick, and I'll show auto splits at the same time. So how do we make our words turn into shapes? Okay, so let's go to DesignShop. I'll start new, create some text. So you just click on the text, hit Control-T, whatever you want. Insert text. It all gets you to the same spot. And you type in, let's do oval. All right. I don't like the kerning on that. It's going to bother me, so I'm going to fix it. All right. So now I've got a word. Now we want to shape that into what we want it to look like. So we want to turn it into an oval. So I'm going to change this to line type oval. You'll see that adds a blue line on top and bottom. So now I can add points to here. So if I just add a right click, left click, and drag, that's cute, but that's not an oval, right? I'm getting the shape, but if I want it to be a perfect arc, I can hold the Control key down as I move that point. So by holding Control, it will make that arc nice and smooth and not make it look like a sine wave there. Okay, so Control and drag will allow that to be there. So then you just drag it around until you get the shape you want. Okay, and you can play with the handles and all of that. So all of these work the same way. So regardless of what you want, I can say, okay, slant, and then I'll text. All right, I can go change it to envelope and then move my points around to whatever I'm wanting it to do. You know, whatever shape I want it to have. I can move these around. Make it. Now, I always play with the word wrap. Not word wrap, I'm sorry. Envelope versus perspective. Just to see, sometimes one looks better than the other, and one is forcing a 3D perspective, the other one is just stretching the text out to fit whatever shape you draw. So, you know, I always play with them and see which I like best, and depending on it, you know, go with that. So you can make these into any shape you want. Left clicking adds straight points, right clicks add curves, and you can just move them around, changing your shape to be whatever you want. I'm making quite the mess here, but just to show you all the different ways you can transform it. Okay. Now, with the splits, the auto splits, like right here, I've got a column. And this is another way to show that earlier question on why, you know, how do you get rid of fill stitch when it's really set to be a satin? Well, under your top stitching, you can tell I have it set to satin, but it's clearly got some fill in there. Well, that's because those stitches are longer than 70 points. So if I just want them to be satin stitch, I can change this to 0, and you'll see now they're all satin. All right. Or let's say I leave it at 70 and I don't want any bigger, but I still don't like that look. Down here under presets, you can say auto split. And that will add kind of like a little split down there to give it a pretty neat effect. I like it a lot when I'm trying to, you know, get rid of the random fill and make it more intentional. To me, it just looks nicer. Okay, so those are your auto split. Okay. Can you show us how to align a design from a Claudia Donnell that you use laser alignment? Yes. All right. So I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with those type of designs. I did it again. So what those are designs that are very large. So you sew out a part and it's got some feature that you then hoop and align the design to that feature. And it's intended to be done on single needle machines, and it's quite the process. Well, when you're doing them here, it's really just a matter of using our laser registration and the features that are built within DesignShop to be able to do it. So I made a slide to show that. So what you would do is in DesignShop, wherever you want the features to be registered for when you do your laser alignment, you would come over there and use a vector line and draw a line in there. So you would go click on this, say select vector line, come up here, make it a red line, and I think it's that. So, yep, the brush is red, pen is nothing, width is 0. So you would then, wherever the points are that you want it to register to, you would draw your line and hit enter. So I've got my red vector line right there. Okay, there's no width to it, it's not showing up, but that's where it is. So from there, after you send this design, you can then laser left, laser bullseye, and the design will rotate and center and scale to basically to those points in the design. So a lot of times Melco will show this at trade shows relative to DTG. So they'll print something on a garment and then they'll do 2 laser alignment points and it will scale, rotate, and place the thing. It's this exact same concept that you would use for these. It's just you have to do a little bit of prep work. So if you imagine if you're doing different hoopings, you know, you'd sew your first one. On your second one, you'd have the design and you go draw a line for those 2 points. That way when you hoop, you go to point 1, laser left, laser bullseye. And it will rotate in place and scale your design where you want it to go. Okay, it's pretty simple to do. It's fun. But it's kind of hard to show you without going to a machine. So, Kelly, might have to come back to that one. Oh, take a look at the Graphic to Embroidery Assistant. Yeah, it really depends on how, the Graphic to Embroidery Assistant depends on how good your art is. So there is some art built into the software. So if you go to See Designs, Graphics, let's go look at, I don't know, pull up the, yeah, let's just do the coffee cup. All right. So I've got a design. So Graphic to Embroidery Assistant, right? So I can select it, click on this, and that, oh, that one just did a straight conversion because I didn't actually use the assistant. I used the converter. So here I'd say Graphic to Embroidery Assistant, and it's really just a wizard. It walks you through what it wants you to do. All right, specify the number of colors you want to have. So if you want 1, 2, 3, 4, however many colors of thread. This one has 4 colors. If you want it to have less, you can see the lower it goes, it's changing the design. So you'll see of what it's going to suggest for the different colors. All right. So you'd say your different colors. If you need to be able to pick colors or recolor things, you can come through and use that. Once you have your colors, you'd say next. Click on the first color we'd like to stitch, red. Okay. Say next, it's going to show the order that they're sewing in. If you want to reorder it, resequence it, you can play with the buttons. You'd say next, and there we go. All right. Edit stitch directions, insert splices. So, like I said, it's really just a wizard that's walking you through creating stuff. So I can come over here, play with stitch directions, add them around, whatever you want. Add splices if need be. When it's done, I'd say next. All right, so now the red's gone. So now we pick the next color we want to do. All right, so it's going to do the brown. Say next. It's just going to sew that one element. Insert a stitch direction. So that's all this thing's doing. It's walking you through step by step through each creation of the elements within the design. Now, I'm going to exit out of that because I did a straight conversion earlier, so now I'm duplicating things. But that's what your Graphic to Embroidery Assistant does. It's walking you through. It's a wizard. You just follow the prompts at the top, move things along. I'll say I don't use it a lot. I tend to use vector art or use this Stitch Graphic region. Stitch Graphic region, if you select it, as long as you have art that has clean boundaries, it works pretty nicely. It'll go find the shape for you. Sometimes you still got some cleanup work to do because it'll have too many points. This one did nice. If the cleaner the artwork is, the better it will work out for you. Okay. What else did we have? Talked about that some. All right, so there was a question on, can we make chenille type designs? And question is yes. How do you do it? Honestly, I don't have a lot of experience doing those. I've not sewn a whole bunch. Mainly because I just don't do that sort of thing much. I've seen them. They're really pretty. But what I would suggest for those is, and if there's a lot of interest, we can see about doing a single topic on it. But let me give you the highlights of it. So if you go to a link, which I posted on the comments already, or better yet, let me show you how to get to this. So if I go to melcoservice.com, click on the FAQ, and then from here, I can type chenille, if I can spell it. Of course, I got rid of my cheat sheet, so how does it? S-H-E-C-H-E-N-I-L-E. There we go. All right, so if I search for chenille, all these documents will come up. So right here, I'll click on that one. Now you'll find there's a document here that shows you how to do it. There's a style, so you can download the style and put it with the other styles in the software, and I'll show you how you use that in a moment. And then there's also a sample design. So if you open up the sample design, it'll actually show you one, so you can have it as reference to test sew it out. You have a known good essentially to play with. But that style, if you want to use that, you can draw whatever you want that you want to turn into a chenille design. Select it, go to properties, and under the styles, now once you download that, you'll have that sample classic, and you can tell it to apply to the selection. And that will take all those practices that are described in this document, and it will apply it for you. So you don't have to go and know how to do all the setups. All right. Now you still have to set up your machine and do all that. So it is a document well worth going through, because it will talk about, you know, how you set up your machine, all of that, the different tips and tricks. If you really want to know all the settings behind it, they're in here. But the easiest way is just to use the style sheet, and then you would go and set up the machine to purposely run that fancy stitch, and it will just sew it out for you. Okay, it's a fun little technique. Like I said, I don't use it a whole lot, but if there's interest, we can see about possibly adding that to our list of weeklies and Facebook Lives. So that is all the questions that I had ahead of time, and I accidentally closed Facebook, so I'm not sure if there's any others that were added, so I'm quick going there. Sorry, give me a moment. Maybe. All right. And so I hope this was helpful. And remember, if you have questions, go to send them to applications@melco.com, and we'll either get back to you or add them to our list of questions for here. So let's see, now that I'm back on Facebook, are there any other questions there? Maybe. I don't see any. All right. Well, I don't see any others typed in. It may just be slow to update since I accidentally closed the screen. So if there are, oh, there it is. I'll be sure to check on them and see if we can add them to the list. Yeah, it's not popping back up for me. So I'll assume that there's none. If there are, we'll add them to the list for next week. We're going to be doing these for the foreseeable future on Fridays. I apologize for the technical difficulties earlier, but we will get it down and on a regular schedule for you. So be sure to send in your questions. Again, my name's Samantha, and I will talk to you next time. Sure, if there's any others that were added.